Please, may I have this dance?
In his final days, M.O. Howard, the stern leader of the Three Stooges, broke a silence he had carried for decades. For years, audiences saw him as the tough brother, the one handing out the slaps and eye pokes. But behind closed doors, he lived with a truth far heavier than any comedy act. It was a truth about his younger brother, Curley, the man who brought pure chaos and joy to millions. Fans adored Curley as the heart of the trio, the lovable childlike figure whose barks, spins, and wild improvisations made history. But what M.O. finally admitted at the end of his life wasn't a story of laughter. It was a confession of guilt, regret, and hidden sorrow. He revealed a side of Curley that no one in the audience ever truly saw, a side filled with pain, decline, and sacrifice. This wasn't just a story about Hollywood success. It was the story of two brothers bound together by love, torn apart by fame, and haunted by choices that could never be undone. Brooklyn roots and family bond. Long before the fame of Hollywood, the story of the Howard brothers began in the crowded streets of Brooklyn, New York. Mo Howard, born Moses Harry Horowitz in 1897, grew up in a working-class Jewish immigrant family that never had much money but carried deep resilience. He was the fourth of 5 brothers, and from a young age, M.O. developed a natural instinct to protect and lead. Neighbors remembered him as the boy who would throw himself into fights with schoolyard bullies if it meant keeping his younger siblings safe. Among those siblings was the youngest, Jerome Lester Horowitz, better known to the world as Curley. Born in 1903, Jerome was a sweet-natured child with a mischievous spark. Unlike M.O., who carried the weight of responsibility, Jerome carried joy. He was clumsy in the most endearing way, full of spontaneous humor that seemed to burst out without effort. Even as a boy, he had the kind of presence that could shift the mood of a room in seconds. The timing of their childhood was no accident in shaping what was to come. The early 1900s were the golden years of silent film, when theaters across New York filled with audiences eager to see the latest antics of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. M.O. was captivated. He would skip school just to sneak into Nickelodeon's, watching closely, memorizing every pratfall and comic gesture. Jerome often tagged along, copying what he saw and putting on small shows in their neighborhood. Unlike trained performers, Jerome never seemed to be acting. Laughter just seemed to follow him. Their mother, Jenny, recognized the contrasting roles her boys played. M.O. was the driving force, the one who carried ambition for the entire family. Curley was the light, the laughter that made hardship bearable. Together, their dynamic laid the foundation for something that would one day transform comedy itself. From those crowded Brooklyn streets, 2 brothers grew into very different men. One a leader determined to lift his family out of poverty, the other a natural entertainer whose charm came without effort. Neither could have known that their bond, forged in childhood, would one day capture the hearts of millions around the world. The birth of the Three Stooges. By the late 1920s, M.O. had already carved out a life on stage. Vaudeville was booming, and he found steady work performing alongside comedian Ted Healy. With his sharp, bowl-cut haircut and commanding presence, M.O. quickly became the natural boss figure of the act, the one dishing out slaps, pokes, and insults that the audience couldn't get enough of. But while Mo's career was finding its rhythm, his younger brother Jerome seemed like the last person anyone would expect to join him. Jerome was shy off stage, reserved, and self-conscious about his heavy build. Unlike his brothers, he had no formal training and seemed more comfortable on the sidelines than under the spotlight. But when opportunity came knocking in 1932, everything changed. Mo's brother Shemp, who had been part of the act, decided to walk away. A replacement was needed, and M.O. took a gamble that shocked everyone. He pushed for Jerome. At first, the idea sounded absurd. Could the quiet, unpolished youngest brother really hold his own in front of thousands of people? Jerome thought so. In a move that would define his life, he shaved off his thick hair and mustache, creating the bald, childlike image that would become instantly recognizable. With that transformation, Curley was born. The effect on stage was immediate and electric. The first time Jerome, now Curley, stepped into the act, audiences erupted. His unpredictable antics, strange noises, and clumsy but lovable charm lit up the room. What M.O. had seen all along became undeniable. Jerome wasn't just funny, he was a natural-born star. Within months, the trio, M.O., Larry Fine, and Curley, was stealing shows right out from under Ted Healy's shadow. By 1934, they finally cut ties with Healy altogether and signed a contract with Columbia Pictures. That decision marked a turning point not just for the brothers, but for comedy history itself. What began as a small vaudeville act had suddenly become a full-fledged phenomenon. The Three Stooges were no longer just performers. They were on their way to becoming legends. Curley's rise as the heart of the Stooges. The move to Columbia Pictures in 1934 pushed the Three Stooges into the national spotlight, and almost immediately, Curley stole the show. While M.O. played the domineering leader and Larry filled the role of the bewildered sidekick, it was Curley's wild unpredictability that audiences couldn't resist. He wasn't just performing scripted jokes. He was creating moments no one could have written. Curley had a gift that set him apart from nearly every other comedian of the time: pure improvisation. Directors often let the camera roll with no instruction, just to see what he might invent on the spot. He spun in dizzying circles, barked like a dog, let out his famous high-pitched nyuk, 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 and could turn the smallest accident into a scene-stealing gag. Columbia executives quickly realized that they had struck gold. In 1934, the Short Men in Black earned an Academy Award nomination, cementing the trio as comedy's rising stars. Through the Depression years, their shorts gave audiences something they desperately needed: laughter in the face of hardship. And while the act was billed as an ensemble, it was Curley who drew the most attention. Children mimicked his noises on playgrounds. Adults howled at his pratfalls, and critics reluctantly admitted that beneath the silliness was a rare kind of comic genius. For M.O., this success was bittersweet. On screen, he played the bully who slapped his brother around, but off-screen, he acted as Curley's fiercest protector. M.O. fought constantly with Columbia's ruthless producer, Harry Cohn, over contracts and conditions, trying to ensure the Stooges weren't exploited. Yet even as M.O. battled with the studio, he couldn't ignore one simple truth: Curley had become the heart of the team. By the late 1930s, the Three Stooges weren't just popular, they were cultural icons. But behind every laugh and every pie in the face, pressure was quietly building. The fame that made Curley adored by millions was also beginning to take its toll. Cracks began to show. By the early 1940s, the laughter that had made Curley a household name began to mask a troubling reality. Off-screen, Jerome Horwitz was struggling. The constant grind of Columbia's demanding schedule left little time for rest. The studio pushed the Stooges to churn out up to 8 short films a year, and while audiences saw endless energy on screen, Curley was quietly running out of it. Away from the cameras, he began leaning heavily on late-night parties, drinking, and fast living to cope with the pressure. Friends noticed a change. His once boundless energy dimmed, his timing slowed, and his health began to decline. But because Curley was the group's biggest draw, Columbia executives turned a blind eye, continuing to work him to exhaustion. M.O., ever the protective brother, tried to intervene. He urged Jerome to slow down, to take care of himself, but Curley brushed it off. The truth was, he felt trapped. Audiences adored him as Curley, but in real life, Jerome longed for something simpler: a family, stability, peace. Yet every time he stepped on stage or in front of a camera, he buried that desire beneath the booming laughter of millions. Even in the films, careful viewers could spot the difference. By the mid-1940s, Curley's movements were stiffer, his once effortless improvisations fewer and far between. Still, he pushed through, determined not to let his brothers or his fans down. But the cracks were spreading, and soon, they would become impossible to ignore. The stroke and career ending. In 1946, the breaking point finally arrived. During the filming of the short Halfwit's Holiday, Curley collapsed on set. At just 42 years old, he had suffered a massive stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to continue performing. For a man whose entire life revolved around physical comedy, it was a devastating blow, not only to him, but to the entire act. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Three Stooges were at the height of their popularity, with contracts still demanding more films. Columbia executives, always cold and calculating, wasted no time in pressuring M.O. and Larry to find a replacement. Heartbroken but determined to keep the group alive, M.O. turned to another brother, Shemp, who reluctantly stepped back into the act he had left years earlier. For Curley, the transition was crushing. He had gone from being the beloved centerpiece of the Stooges to sitting helplessly on the sidelines. His once legendary energy was gone, replaced by long hospital stays and painful rehabilitation attempts. Fans wrote letters begging for his return, but the truth was unavoidable. Curley's career as the heart of the Three Stooges was over. M.O., who had spent years protecting his little brother from the harshness of show business, now had to face a reality that he couldn't shield him from. The laughter continued on screen, but behind it was a family torn apart by tragedy. And sadly, Curley's decline was only the beginning of a darker chapter that would haunt the Horwitz family for years to come. Final years of decline. After his stroke in 1946, Curley's life entered a heartbreaking chapter. Once the liveliest member of the Stooges, he now faced a reality filled with hospital visits, treatments, and the slow loss of his independence. He tried to fight his way back. There were brief moments where he seemed to recover, sparking hope that maybe he could return to the stage, but each time, his health slipped further away. M.O. never abandoned his younger brother. Even with the relentless schedule of the Stooges continuing under Shemp, M.O. spent every spare moment visiting Curley, helping him with simple tasks, and trying to lift his spirits. The same brother who once slapped Curley around for laughs on screen was now the one gently holding his hand in hospital rooms. By the late 1940s, Curley's condition had worsened. He suffered a second, more devastating stroke in 1947, leaving him severely weakened. The man who had once filled theaters with laughter could barely speak or walk without help. His appearances in public became rare, though M.O. occasionally brought him to film sets just so he could feel included, if only for a moment. Tragically, Curley's decline was relentless. In January of 1952, Jerome Curley Howard passed away at just 48 years old. His death left M.O. shattered. To the world, he was a comedy legend, but to M.O., he was still the baby brother he had sworn to protect. The grief never left him. Though the Stooges continued, something vital was missing. The magic that Curley brought could never be replaced. His final years were a reminder of how quickly joy can be taken away, and how even the brightest stars can fade too soon. Mo's lifelong guilt and confession. After Curley's death in 1952, M.O. Howard carried a weight that no audience could see. On screen, he remained the commanding boss of the Three Stooges, leading new members like Shemp, Joe Besser, and later Curly Joe Dorita. But behind the scenes, M.O. was haunted by the choices he had made. Choices that, in his mind, contributed to his brother's decline. M.O. had always pushed Curly to perform, fearing that without him, the act and the livelihoods of everyone involved would collapse. Looking back, he admitted privately that every slap, poke, and stage pratfall had come at a cost far greater than he ever imagined. Letters uncovered decades later reveal the depth of his anguish. In one, he wrote, "We were making people laugh while my brother was dying in front of me." Television in the late 1950s brought a new wave of fame for the old shorts. Children who had never seen the Stooges in theaters now laughed at Curly's antics for the first time. For the public, the joy was endless. But for M.O., every laugh was bittersweet. Each chuckle reminded him of the brother he had loved and lost, and the painful knowledge that Curly's decline had been accelerated by the demands of the very studio they trusted. Even in his final days, M.O. couldn't let go. In May 1975, bedridden and battling lung cancer, family members brought reels of old films to his hospital room. Nurses recalled him murmuring Jerome, as if speaking directly to his brother, tears filling his eyes as Curly's face appeared on screen. It was then, in the quiet moments before his death, that M.O. finally confessed the truth he had carried for decades. Curley had been more than a comic genius. He had been a human being who sacrificed everything for laughter. Behind every giggle, every spin, and every nyuk, there had been struggle, pain, and the relentless pressure of a life lived in the spotlight. When M.O. passed away on May 4, 1975, at age 77, he left behind more than a comedy legacy. He left a confession that changed how the world remembered Curley, not merely as a clown, but as a man whose life was filled with both brilliance and tragedy. Legacy beyond laughter. Curly Howard's story is more than a tale of comedy. It's a reminder that behind every laugh, there can be untold struggle. He brought joy to millions, yet his life was marked by exhaustion, illness, and sacrifice that few ever knew. The genius that audiences celebrated came at a personal cost, and the man behind the antics was often overshadowed by the character he created. M.O. Howard's lifelong guilt and ultimate confession added a layer of humanity to the legend. He revealed that Curly was not just the lovable clown with the high-pitched nyuk, but a brother, a human being, and a victim of circumstances that no comedy could mask. Through Mo's eyes, we see the full picture. The laughter that brightened theaters was intertwined with the pain of relentless performance and unyielding expectations. Yet even in tragedy, there is a legacy. Television brought Curley's performances to new generations, and children continued to mimic his antics, discovering joy in his timeless humor. But with the story of Mo and Curley, we learn that every laugh comes with a story, every genius with a price, and every hero with vulnerability. In the end, Curly Howard remains immortal, not just for the chaos he unleashed on screen, but for the humanity he embodied behind it. His life, his struggles, and Mo's confession remind us that laughter can be both beautiful and bittersweet, and that every legend has a hidden story worth remembering. So when you watch The Three Stooges, take a moment to see the man behind the comedy, the brother behind the genius, and the sacrifices that made history. Curly's gift to the world was laughter, but his story gives us something even deeper, a reminder of the fragility, the courage, and the heart behind every smile.